It's 1981. The Cold War is at its peak. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, a plane is taking off that shouldn't exist. Not according to the laws of aerodynamics, not according to anything the Soviets have on their radar screens. Because this aircraft, they literally can't see it. The pilot climbing into that cockpit, Hal Farley. And what he's about to tell us rewrites everything we thought we knew about aviation history. This is the untold story of Skunk Works, the F-117 Nighthawk, and the men who built the impossible. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear has never been shared publicly before. Hal Farley doesn't look like a man who's kept secrets for decades. Sitting across from me in his Nevada home, surrounded by photos of aircraft that most people have never heard of, he's finally ready to talk. "You know what's funny?" he says, leaning back in his chair. "For 30 years, I couldn't tell my own kids what I did for a living. My daughter thought I was a boring engineer who worked on commercial planes, but Hal Farley was anything but boring. He was one of the original test pilots for the F-117 Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth aircraft. A plane so secret that even its existence was denied by the U.S. government until 1988, 7 years after it began flying combat missions. But to understand Hal's story, we need to go back, way back, to 1959, when a legendary engineer named Kelly Johnson founded something that would change warfare forever, Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects Division. You probably know it by its unofficial name, Skunk Works. People think Skunk Works was some high-tech facility with chrome walls and computer screens everywhere. Hal tells me, a slight smile crossing his face. The original Skunk Works, it was literally next to a plastics factory that smelled so bad, people named it after the moonshine factory in the Lyle Abner comic strip. The Skunk Works, that's where it all started. 1959 was a pivotal year. The U-2 spy plane Skunk Works' first major success was already flying reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union, but Kelly Johnson knew something the rest of the world didn't. The U-2 was vulnerable. Soviet surface-to-air missiles were getting better. It was only a matter of time, and he was right. On May 1, 1960, just months after our story begins, France's Gary Powers would be shot down in his U-2 over Soviet territory, triggering an international crisis. But back in 1959, Kelly Johnson was already working on the solution. Something faster, something that could fly higher. The successor to the U-2 would eventually become the SR-71 Blackbird, a plane that still holds speed records today. Kelly had this philosophy, Hal explains. He called them his 14 rules. The first one was simple: the Skunk Works manager must be delegated practically complete control of their program in all aspects. I pause and ask him what that really meant. It meant no bureaucracy, no committees, no endless meetings. If you had an idea, you built it. If it worked, great. If it failed, you learned from it and moved on. Kelly could make decisions in hours that would take the normal Air Force procurement process years. This wasn't just efficient. It was revolutionary, and it created a culture unlike anything else in aerospace. Here is something you won't read in the history books: Skunk Works engineers used to play pranks on Soviet spy satellites. We knew their orbital schedules, Hal says, his eyes lighting up. So sometimes we'd arrange equipment on the runway to spell out messages, nothing classified, just. Let's say we had a sense of humor about the whole thing, but beneath the jokes was deadly serious work. The paranoia was real, the security was suffocating. You couldn't tell anyone what you were working on, not your spouse, not your parents. There were engineers working 50 feet from each other on different projects who couldn't talk about their work. Marriages fell apart because of it. I knew guys who got divorced because their wives thought they were having affairs. The truth. They were just working on classified aircraft. Hal pauses, and for a moment, something darker crosses his face. There were casualties, too. Test pilots who died testing experimental aircraft whose crashes could never be publicly acknowledged. Families who were told their loved ones died in training accidents, never knowing they were actually pushing the boundaries of what was aerodynamically possible. This was the hidden cost of keeping secrets. And the secrets were only getting bigger. By the 1970s, the Cold War was escalating. Soviet radar systems were becoming increasingly sophisticated. American aircraft losses in Vietnam had proven that traditional bombing raids were becoming suicidal missions against modern air defenses. The question facing the Pentagon was simple but terrifying: how do you fight a war when the enemy can see you coming? The first time I saw the Have Blue prototype, I thought it was a prank. Hal admits it looked like someone had folded a paper airplane wrong and just decided to go with it. Have Blue was the demonstrator that would eventually evolve into the F-117, and it looked absolutely bizarre. Traditional aircraft are designed with smooth curves and aerodynamic elegance. Have Blue looked like it had been assembled from flat pieces of scrap metal at odd angles. Because, essentially, it was. The genius was in the mathematics. A Soviet physicist named Piotr Afemtsev had published a paper on electromagnetic wave reflection that the Soviet military had completely ignored. Lockheed scientists read it and realized if you shaped an aircraft with precise geometric angles, you could scatter radar waves away from their source. The plane wouldn't be invisible, it would just reflect radar in every direction except back to the radar receiver. There was just one problem: the resulting shape would be aerodynamically terrible. The computer models said it would fly like a brick, Hal tells me. Actually, that's being generous. A brick has better flight characteristics. The Have Blue prototype was fundamentally unstable. It wanted to fall out of the sky at every moment, so how do you fly something that doesn't want to fly? Computers, Hal says simply. The aircraft made thousands of micro-adjustments per second through the flight control system. The pilot was just telling the computer where they wanted to go. The computer was doing the actual flying. This was revolutionary. It meant that aircraft could be designed for stealth first and aerodynamics second. The computers would handle the impossible physics. But theory is one thing, actually flying this contraption, that was something else entirely. December 1st, 1977, Groom Lake, Nevada. That's when we first got Have Blue airborne. Hal was the pilot for that first flight. That honor went to Bill Park, but he was there watching from the ground. You have to understand, everyone was terrified. We had done ground tests, taxi tests, everything short of actually leaving the runway. But we were basically asking a test pilot to strap himself into a flying computer and hope the programmers got everything right. The aircraft lifted off the runway, climbed to a few thousand feet, and then something went wrong. One of the hydraulic systems started acting up. Bill had to bring it back immediately. We all thought the program was over. Kelly Johnson looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. But the aircraft landed safely, the hydraulic issue was fixed, and 3 days later they tried again. This time it worked. When Bill landed and climbed out of the cockpit, he had this huge grin on his face. He just said, "It flies, it actually flies." The impossible had become possible. The US now had a stealth aircraft, but stealth was only the beginning. The real question was, could you turn this experimental prototype into an actual weapon? Could you mass produce it? Could you train pilots to fly it? Could you send it into combat? That's where Hal's story really begins. I got the call in 1981. Very vague, very classified. Just, would you be interested in testing a new aircraft? You'll have to relocate. You can't tell anyone what you're working on. Are you in? Hal had been a test pilot for years, flying everything from F for Phantoms to experimental prototypes, but nothing had prepared him for this. The first briefing, they showed us the F-117. My first thought was, that's not a plane. That's a geometry project. My second thought was, they expect me to fly that. The F-117 was even more radical than Have Blue. Larger, more angular, covered in radar-absorbent material that had to be meticulously maintained. and painted completely black for night operations. It earned the nickname Nighthawk officially, but we called it other things. The Wobbly Goblin was popular. The Black Jet, sometimes just the Cockroach because it was ugly but impossible to kill. Training was intense and bizarre. We could only fly at night. Every mission was a night mission. Why? Because even though the plane was invisible to radar, it wasn't invisible to eyeballs. Someone looking up during the day could see it and report it, so we became nocturnal. We'd sleep all day, brief in the evening, fly from midnight to dawn, debrief, and go home as the sun came up. It played havoc with their bodies and their personal lives. My wife thought I was losing my mind. I'd be asleep at noon, wake up at dinner time, leave at 11 p.m., and come home for breakfast. For years, all I could tell her was, "It's classified." That's it. That's all I could say, but the sacrifice was about to be tested in the most serious way possible. Most people think the F-117's first combat mission was the Gulf War in 1991. That's when it was declassified and shown to the public. But that's not when it first saw combat. Hal leans forward. This is clearly something that still bothers him. We flew combat missions for years before anyone knew we existed. Panama, 1989, that was the first publicly acknowledged combat mission. But there were others, things we can't talk about. Places we weren't supposed to be. The doctrine was simple but terrifying. The F-117 would go in first, alone, at night, and destroy the most heavily defended targets. Enemy air defense headquarters, command and control centers. Targets that conventional aircraft couldn't reach without massive losses. You'd fly hundreds of miles into enemy territory by yourself. No wingman, no support. If something went wrong, there was no rescue mission coming. You were on your own. The psychological pressure was immense. Every mission, you're thinking, is tonight the night my luck runs out? Is this the night some radar operator gets lucky and sees me? The aircraft is designed to be invisible, but nothing is perfect. There are gaps in coverage, split seconds where you might be detected, but mission after mission, the F-117 proved itself. It could hit targets with unprecedented accuracy in the most defended airspace in the world and return home safely. By the time Desert Storm happened in 1991, we had refined it to an art. The F-117s flew only to % of the combat missions in that war, but we hit 40% of the strategic targets. And not a single F-117 was damaged by enemy fire. It was a stunning vindication of the Skunk Works philosophy. Impossible is just a starting point. November 1988, the Pentagon held a press conference and revealed, for the first time, that the F-117 existed. I remember watching the news coverage with my family, Hal says, and suddenly he's emotional. My kids finally understood what I'd been doing. My wife finally understood why I'd been gone all those nights. It was like this massive weight lifted off my shoulders, but going public also meant something else. The Soviets now knew the US had stealth technology. The arms race was entering a new phase. Within weeks, we started seeing changes in Soviet radar deployments. They were adapting, looking for new ways to detect stealth aircraft. The cat-and-mouse game was evolving, and there was another consequence Hal didn't anticipate. Suddenly, everyone wanted to interview us. Everyone wanted to know what it was like. And we had to figure out how to talk about it. After decades of saying nothing, we had to learn how to tell our story without revealing things that were still classified. It's a balance Hal is still navigating today, more than 3 decades later. There are things I can talk about now, and there are things I'll take to my grave. That's just part of the deal, but stealth wasn't perfect. And on March 27, 1999, the world learned that the hard way. During the Kosovo War, an F-117 piloted by Lt. Colonel Dale Zelko was shot down by a Serbian surface-to-air missile. I remember getting the call, Hal says quietly, and F-117 was down. For a moment, we all thought, this is it, the technology failed. But as we learned more about what happened, we realized it was more complicated. The Serbian forces had done something clever. They modified their radar systems to operate on longer wavelengths, which could sometimes detect the F-117. They also tracked NATO flight patterns, predicting when and where aircraft would approach. And on that night, they got lucky the bomb bay doors were open, briefly increasing the aircraft's radar signature. The aircraft was hit, but the pilot ejected safely and was rescued. That was the important thing. Dale survived, but the incident sent shockwaves through the stealth community. It proved that stealth isn't magic, it's science, and science can be countered with better science. The aircraft was designed in the 1970s. By the late 1990s, the technology was aging. Adversaries were adapting. It was a sobering reminder. In the world of military technology, nothing stays dominant forever. As our conversation winds down, I ask Hal the big question: was it worth it? The secrecy, the sacrifices, the years away from family. He takes a long pause before answering. I missed my daughter's high school graduation because I was on a mission I couldn't talk about. I missed my son's first baseball game. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, all of it. For years, my family thought I was just a workaholic who didn't care. Another pause, but I also helped keep my country safe. The F-117 prevented countless American deaths by being able to strike targets that would have been suicide missions for conventional aircraft. Dictators and terrorists learned that nowhere was safe, that there was no air defense system that could protect them if they crossed certain lines. So yes, he says finally, it was worth it, but that doesn't mean it was easy. And it doesn't mean there weren't costs. He shows me a photo on his phone. It's from just a few years ago, his whole family together for the first time at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, standing in front of an F-117 on display. My granddaughter asked me, "Grandpa, did you really fly that?" And I got to say yes. I got to tell her stories. Not all of them, but some, and she looked at me like I was a superhero. His eyes are wet. That moment made up for a lot. Today, the F-117 is retired. The last aircraft flew its final mission in 2008, but the legacy of Skunk Works continues. The F-22 Raptor, the F-35 Lightning, the rumored SR-7 to hypersonic reconnaissance aircraft. All descendants of that culture Kelly Johnson created in 1959. The philosophy hasn't changed, Hal tells me. Small teams, minimal bureaucracy, impossible deadlines. Make it work no matter what, but there's something else that continues, the secrecy. Right now, there are engineers and test pilots working on projects that won't be revealed for 20 or 30 years. Maybe longer. They're dealing with the same struggles we dealt with, the same sacrifices, and someday maybe they'll get to tell their stories too. As I pack up my recording equipment, Hal walks me to the door. On the wall is a framed photo of him standing next to an F-117 taken shortly before the aircraft was retired. You know what I hope people take away from this, he says. It's not that stealth technology is cool or that we beat the Soviets or any of that. It's that when America needs impossible things done, there are people willing to do them, people willing to sacrifice. People willing to keep secrets, even from their own families, because they believe in something bigger. He shakes my hand. That's the real secret of Skunk Works, not the technology. The people, and with that, Hal Farley closes the door, some secrets revealed, others kept. A life lived in the shadows, finally getting a moment in the light. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. And if you know someone who served in a classified program and has a story to tell, reach out to us in the comments. Until next time, keep looking up. You never know what's flying overhead.